Good morning. Thank you for joining us. My name is Teresa Longyear, and I'm part of a team of people here at the museum who organize and install these books that we have on display in the gallery. And my day-to-day job, I work as a conservator of works of art. And I've been very fortunate to engage with all kinds of great objects, like a vase from 550 BC to a painting made in New York 3 years ago. And over the years, I've worked on pieces by artists that you would know. Picasso, Matisse, many water lilies by Claude Monet, and the works of Alfred Munnings. So all these projects initially involve examining the object up close, usually with magnification, essentially to study the technique of the artist, basically the artist's handwriting. And the approach is particularly helpful when something might be a fake or stolen, and I have all sorts of stories related to that. But anyway, with this exhibition, we have a rare opportunity to step into the world of Sir Alfred James Munnings. The selection includes works of art from every period of Munnings' life. He's most known, as you I'm sure all know, for the racing scenes and portraits of famous horses. However, equally important to him as an artist was the life around him, which included his wife and garden, as well as the landscape and people of the English countryside, Norfolk and Suffolk. Many family members and local residents were models for his paintings and poster designs throughout his life. So Munnings had a razor-sharp sense of observation and developed an instinctive eye for capturing the physical structure of a horse. Throughout his life, he rode, bred, and lived with horses, which gave him an unusual insight into the animal's form, gesture, and character. He developed a remarkable ability to convey the movement of the classical thoroughbred, as well as the color, action, and drama of the racing scene. So saddling at Cheltenham March meeting was a favorite painting of Munnings, and he wrote that it was a picture he always wanted to do. So he builds the drama of saddling up before the race, with various moments happening simultaneously. The trainer in a trench coat discusses race strategies with the jockey while they look over the horse. The grooms are at work, the saddles are slipped on, jockeys adjust stirrups, riders begin their way to the post. And he used his own horses as models. And as he said, he wanted to get everything in the picture in the right place. So he also relied on his own studies of scenes before he creates this large landscape. He first lays out the composition by using a pointed sable brush and stiff bristle brush to sketch the details in light red. And then he thinly painted the sky with pale pinks and the hills in a warmer tone. He let that layering dry, and then painted the figures and horses from left to right. With lining him up, the orange jockey, number 10, this one over here, he tightly crops the image, almost like a photograph. And the start of the Cambridgeshire, which is over here, is another one of Munnings' favorite subjects, starts. So year after year, he loved to paint starts, and later in life he recorded starts for sheer relaxation rather than commission. He went to Newmarket in Suffolk just to socialize and paint. And in the booklet, which I have here, you can see one of the sketchbooks from Newmarket, where he jotted down preliminary ideas for starts. So, and then in this composition, before the gallop, saddling point-to-point horses, he used his own horses, Master Munn and the Bayes Castle Pabla, with his grooms Harvey and Robert as models. Again, he deliberately and assuredly brushed out the composition. He captured the color and light of the environment. The blues and greens of the landscape and sky are reflected in the horses. And with Autumn, which is over on this side, which is from 1914, the sun and shade are described by fleeting impressionistic brushstrokes, which give the illusion of movement. And at the end of the day, a hunting scene, which was another favorite subject of Munnings, he admitted that he needed hunting to freshen his mind and vision. So how did Munnings learn to observe and develop this skillful handling of brush and paint? How did he get here? Well, Munnings traveled extensively throughout his life, and he kept busy. He was always motivated to work. He studied in Paris. He became president of the Royal Academy. He was knighted by King George VI. And in the 1950s, he published a very detailed 3-volume autobiography. He sketched throughout his life on the back of envelopes, menus, invitations, or in a small book always on hand at the racetrack. Near the entrance, and also in the booklet, we have images of the artist in the studio at Castle House, his home, and now the Munnings Art Museum, which is truly a delightful place to visit, with a tea room. It's just 1 hour by train from London, situated in the most idyllic countryside of England. So it's really worth doing. And originally he set up this studio at Swainsthorpe in Norfolk in 1904, but he transported it by train to Castle House and reconstructed it in the garden. So the easel is just like the one he worked on, which there's still a Castle House studio, and you can see that in the various pictures that we have around. So Alfred Munnings was born on October 8, 1878, to mill owner John Munnings and his wife, Emily. He was the second of 4 sons, and the family lived at the mill house in Mendham, beside the River Waveney, on the Norfolk-Suffolk border in England. All these aspects of his early life, the constant activity around the mill, with the river and horses, had a significant influence on his later work as an artist. Horses were an integral part of turn-of-the-century everyday life. As you look around, you can see his love of the river and the English countryside. And at a young age, Munnings showed skill for drawing and making pictures, and his family was extremely supportive. He took drawing lessons from the local parson's daughter. He was initially educated by governesses and attended the local school, and then Framingham College in Suffolk. But at only 14, he joined Page Brothers and Company in Norwich as an apprentice, where he learned to mix artist ink and engrave lithographic stone, which requires great skill. So back here, we have some of his earlier pieces. And Cayley's Crackers was a chocolate and biscuit manufacturer and a major client of Page Brothers. So his first commission came from John Shaw Tompkins, the director of Cayley's. On the easel, we have a poster by Munnings for Cayley's chocolates from about 1900. So Tompkins took Munnings on trips across Europe, bought his paintings, and became Munnings' first patron. In the evening, Munnings attended classes at the Norwich School of Art, which was the center of traditional landscape painting. His passion for countryside was encouraged by the curator of the Norwich Castle Museum, James Reeves, who tutored Munnings in the English landscape painters Constable, Crome, and Cotman. He later commented that, "I trained to invent and draw out of my head perspective, values, tones, and shadow shapes." He studied George Stubbs' Anatomy of a Horse, which is a book, and that allowed him to master the physical structure of the horse to paint. So during this time, he joins the Norwich Art Circle, and he painted romantic scenes inspired by literature and costume figures, like the clay pipe, which was used as a logo by Bullard's Brewery in Norwich. With income from his lithographic commissions, Munnings purchased a carpenter's workshop and converted it into a studio in Mendham. He continued to paint life around him: country fairs, horses and hunting, local villagers, gypsies, especially the Gray family, Nobby, Charlotte, and Fred. When he's 21, this is in 1899, he lifted a hound puppy over a fence, and a wild thorny branch, a bramble in British terms, struck him in the right eye. The damage caused Munnings to lose the sight in his eye. So, however, true to character, Munnings carried on. He was elected to the Royal Institute of Painters in watercolor, and his first two paintings were accepted to the summer show at the Royal Academy, where he exhibited every year until he died. So, to celebrate these two events, Munnings attended the races with a friend at nearby Bungay, and later said, "It was the greatest day of my life." So, an old favorite from 1899 was exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1900, depicts Nina and Cecil with another favorite model, the white pony. When he's 23, and during the 1900s, Munnings attends Académie Julienne in Paris during the summers to study life drawing. His various trips to Europe exposed Munnings to the painting techniques of the Impressionists and the works of Degas, Fantin-Latour, and Claude Monet. As we can see in Madame Genet at the Empire, which is in the back here, which bears comparison to Degas' dancers. And of course he was interested in their work, painting en plein air, outdoors, but also the spontaneity of bold brushstrokes, brilliant color, and buildup of paint helped Munnings to describe the life and action of the subject, whether at the start of a race or in his private garden. His success as an artist led to commissions, exhibitions, and sales of his work. So, in 1929, he buys a gypsy caravan, cart and band of ponies, and he makes excursions to paint the Norfolk countryside, outdoors, and live a vagabond existence. So these are from this time. We have Gypsy Fires, a gypsy encampment, where he recorded the hop pickers, and Gypsy Girl with a White Pony. They're both from 1913. And the Romany community respected Munnings, and many became his models. George Fountain Page, a gypsy boy known as Shrimp, became one of Munnings' favorite models. Grooms George and Bob Curzon also posed as models. And then at this time he buys Angero, a small white pony who also becomes a favorite model. So in London, they have two hugely successful exhibitions in the 20s, only focused on his gypsy compositions. Now, with the Norwich Fair, which is down here, Munnings sketched the dress in white paint. He allowed the canvas to show through as part of the design, giving it depth and a fluid movement to the fabric. This clearly reflects the painting technique of Claude Monet, as Monet routinely left layers of canvas to show through as part of the finished design. The arbor, over here, from 1908, is a portrait of the fiancé of Munnings' youngest brother, Charles, and her dog. The image shows Munnings' technical mastery at portraying the human face, obviously his love of the countryside and desire to paint outdoors, and the methods and theme clearly show this French influence. Sunlight and shadow are created by dabs of color, which define the movement of light. And in his early 30s, Munnings moves to Cornwall to set up a studio there, and stables in Lamorna, where he painted with the Llewellyn School of Art. At this time, he marries Edith Florence Carter Wood. She's also an artist, who unfortunately dies in 1914. And we think, if you look at the back here, Lady in White in the Garden is thought to be a painting of Florence in Cornwall in 1913. He also, at this time, has his first one-man show in London. It's called at Leicester Galleries, pictures of horses, hunting, and country life. So World War I begins in 1914, and Munnings attempts to enlist, but he's repeatedly rejected because of the blindness in his right eye and his age. He's only 36. But horses were crucial to the war effort for fighting and hauling supplies. So his friend, Cecil Oldham, arranged for Munnings to work as a British Army strapper in the southern part of England, where he prepared horses for the Western Front. By late 1917, Munnings was invited to join a group working for the Canadian War Memorials Fund as an official war artist. And the purpose of this fund was to document the Canadian soldier at war through publications, diaries, photographs, and paintings. The fund hired more than 100 artists by the end of the war, and almost 1,000 works of art were produced. So, Munnings goes to France in late January 1918, wearing civilian clothes and carrying with him art supplies, canvases, paper, watercolors, oil, brushes. And eventually, he's assigned to the Canadian Cavalry Brigade at the Western Front and recorded log hauling of the Canadian Forestry Corps in Normandy. So he sketched and painted the daily life of soldiers in the care of the horses in the French landscape. Scenes like watering horses on the march. He was naturally sociable with a keen sense of fun and enjoyed recording the soldiers in his sketchbook during off-duty moments. Army life and his wartime compositions were much like his paintings of the gypsy encampments. Then he returns to London and rents a studio in Glebe Place. The work painted in France is included in the Canadian War Memorials exhibition at the Royal Academy in January 1919. And his equestrian portraits are wildly popular, like the one of General Jack Seeley, the cavalry commander, Munnings first painted in France within sight of the enemy. The Canadian government bought 45 of his works from the exhibition. So this exposure was a turning point in his career. And it was then that Munnings became widely known as a painter of equestrian subjects. It led to equestrian portrait commissions for over the next 20 years. Princess Alice commissioned Munnings to paint a portrait of her husband, the Earl of Athlone, in uniform on horseback. And Munnings was then asked to paint the Grand National winner, Houghton. In his autobiography, Munnings reflected, "I've often wondered, had there been no 1914 war, whether painting people on horseback would have absorbed the greater part of my efforts in the years that followed." Also in 1919, he purchased Castle House in Dedham. And he marries Violet McBride, an accomplished horsewoman we met at the Richmond Horse Show. In the study of Lady Munnings from about 1928, you can see how he developed an almost effortless, efficient painting technique by this time. There's a close-up of her hand in the booklet, and you can see, or you can look yourself and see how he builds with quite a thick paint up close. So Violet had a great business sense and took over all of Munnings' financial affairs, which allowed him to focus entirely on his work. Her social connections created a constant stream of commissions for him. Through the 1920s and 30s, Munnings painted in France, in Spain, and here in the United States for high society patrons. At this time, he also built Belden House with a studio in the Chelsea neighborhood of London. And as you probably all know, in London it's fun because there are these blue plaques, and the house still exists, so you can go see it. And also the Glebe Place studio has a plaque with his name on it. And then a portrait of his dog at Belden House is in the far back, the Shetland collie Sheila. At this time, he wins 2 gold medals at the Paris Salon. And then, in 1924, he was invited to judge an art competition at the Carnegie Art Institute in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Once again, he secured various equestrian portraits. And during the voyage over, he meets Frederick Prince, who's a friend of his, and he's invited to paint his family and neighbors in Boston. He continues to paint equestrian portraits for prominent East Coast families for 6 months. And Queen Mary then commissioned Munnings to paint the royal procession from Windsor Castle to the Ascot Racecourse. Other patrons at this time included Lord Astor, Lord Derby, Prince of Wales, Sir Abe Bailey, and the Rothschilds. A retrospective of his work at the Norwich Castle Museum was attended by over 75,000 visitors. And Munnings was elected President of the Royal Academy and knighted by King George VI in 1944. So during World War II, Castle House was requisitioned by the army. So he and Violet, they moved to Somerset so he could paint landscapes and indulge in hunting on horseback. Leicester Galleries held an exhibition in London of 128 of his pictures, which set a record for revenues received by any living British artist at the time. But even after all this activity, Munnings preferred a private life. Long absences from home kept him from painting subjects of his own choosing, the river and his garden at Castle House. With these 4 compositions, we can see his passion. In the garden from 1928 at Castle House, Munnings created the scene with his typical dense brush strokes loaded with paint. A close-up of the hand holding the book is in the book. From my bedroom window, he makes a portrait of Violet and friends having tea in the garden at Castle House, and the garden looks very much the same today. And then we have the same garden in winter at Castle House, with dabs of paint defining birds all across the landscape. And finally, in the white canoe, Munnings uses his wife and friends as models again, and explored the dramatic effects of light and shadow on the watery surface. He experimented with different textures to document the smooth hull of the wooden canoe, the soft fabric of summer dresses, and the sparkling, slow-moving water and dense foliage. He wrote, "Dead of Mill on a full river in its lush landscape setting could compare with anything of its kind in the world. My one joy was knowing that my home was near a perfect river and a village in unspoiled country. This river was a playground and a reminder of my youth." So from the late 40s to the mid-50s, he indulges in his love of horse racing, especially at Newmarket, where he paints starts and sets up a studio in an old rubbing down house on the side of the race course. When he retires as president of the Royal Academy in 1949, he makes a farewell speech denouncing modern art, and particularly critical of Picasso and Matisse. The speech was broadcast over BBC radio, and so heard throughout Britain, and it was considered scandalous. And so, in '53, he accepted his last commission from Queen Elizabeth II to portray her racehorse Oriole. Munnings was one of only 3 living artists to be honored with a retrospective exhibition at the Royal Academy in 1956. He died at Castle House on January 17, 1959, and his ashes are interred in the crypt of St. Paul's Cathedral in London, next to John Constable. Late Violet, Lady Munnings, opened Castle House to the public as the Munnings Art Museum and died in 1971. And so, what a go, which in British slang describes situations that are incredibly busy, bustling, chaotic, things constantly happening, barely a moment to breathe. And this could very well describe the life of Sir Alfred James Munnings. So if you have any questions, please ask, and enjoy the pictures, and thank you for coming this morning.
I did have a question. Yes. That picture was